East. Operation Epic Fury has already led to the deaths of more than 1,000 civilians and eliminated one of the most powerful leaders in modern history. Donald Trump and the Israelis say the conflict is about security, stability, and that they're providing the people of Iran with an opportunity for change. But the reasons why this war has started are all over the place.
Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon.
This is not a so-called regime change war.
Take back your country.
Eliminate the threat of Iran's short-range ballistic missiles.
We did not start a war. We're trying to stop a war.
So in this foresight, let's talk about what the
Trump administration claims is driving this conflict and why this situation actually looks more like a president tearing up the rulebook to secure his place in the history books.
Seeks the stature or the historical legacy of a figure like Reagan.
This is the biggest gamble taken by Donald Trump, a president who currently feels politically invincible, yet has unleashed chaos across a region he barely understands, putting the lives and futures of millions of people across the Middle East at risk.
Not only is it Donald Trump's biggest gamble, it is by far also his dumbest gamble.
What the United States and Israel have launched is a massive military operation with no clear end in sight. Targets across Iran have been struck in thousands of attacks, with reports indicating that more than 1,000 civilians have been killed. The United States claims that dozens of Iranian military and political leaders have been eliminated, including, most significantly, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Experts from around the world have criticized and condemned the legality of this war. To understand why Israel has taken such action, you should look at the history of Iran. Israel relations since the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran. What you need to know now is that throughout his political career, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has sought to remove a regime he considers an existential threat to Israel.
מאפשר לנו לעשות את מה שאני מייחל לעשות כבר 40 שנה. להכות את משטר הטרור שוק על ירך.
There are two key reasons why Israel chose to act at this moment. First, Iran is currently weaker than before. It can no longer rely on the support of an alliance of proxy military forces opposing Israel, often referred to as the Axis of Resistance. This network has been heavily weakened in recent years. Secondly, and most importantly, Israel is receiving strong backing from the United States.
It wouldn't happen without the leadership of President Trump.
And Donald Trump agreed that the time to act was right now.
This was our last best chance to strike.
Netanyahu and the Israelis were the biggest factors in terms of pushing Trump in this direction, but ultimately, this was Trump's decision.
So Donald Trump decided to abandon decades of United States diplomacy with Iran, choosing direct military action instead.
But why?
Here is what Donald Trump said when he announced Operation Epic Fury.
Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime.
The president's argument appears to focus on three major points: Iran's missiles, its nuclear program, and the future of the Iranian people. Let's examine each of these claims and see how they stand up. Donald Trump has repeatedly warned that Iran is developing missiles capable of striking United States troops overseas, targets in Europe, and even the United States itself. However, a report from 2025 created by the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, which was used to justify a new missile defense system, states that as of May last year, Iran had no missiles capable of reaching the United States and that it could take up to a decade for them to produce around 60 such missiles. In addition, reports indicated that Trump administration officials briefed U.S. congressional staff and said there was no intelligence suggesting Iran was preparing any preemptive strikes against United States targets. Later, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio claimed that the conflict actually began because Israel had already decided it would strike Iran first, and America was concerned about how Iran might respond.
We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces.
Marco Rubio later attempted to walk back that statement, but the messaging remained mixed and inconsistent. The argument about Iran's nuclear threat also raises questions. Less than a year earlier, United States President Donald Trump had claimed that precision strikes had destroyed Iran's nuclear program.
Completely and totally obliterated.
Fast forward to February 22nd this year, and Donald Trump's chief negotiator, Steve Witkoff, claimed that Iran was now only a week away from possessing a nuclear weapon.
Industrial grade bomb-making material. And that's really dangerous.
The Iranian regime insists that its nuclear program is intended only for peaceful purposes, but it has not allowed United Nations inspectors to visit key sites since the bombings that occurred last year in Iran. However, this week the top inspector commented on the supposed imminent threat of an Iranian nuclear weapon.
Many reasons for concern, but there wasn't to be a bomb tomorrow or the day after tomorrow.
In reality, while the United States and Iran were reportedly working behind closed doors to restart negotiations over a nuclear deal, with Iran said to be willing to make significant concessions, the United States was simultaneously building up massive military forces across the Middle East. This raises the question, was a real deal ever possible, or were military strikes always the plan?
There was a deal on the table that was far more attractive to the US side than the JCPOA that the Obama administration secured. Trump chose to declare war instead of declaring victory. But the Iranians, in my view, also could have done things differently.
The Iranians, as always, misjudged, miscalculated, thought that they could play for time, didn't really think that the United States would go for an all-out war.
This leads to the Trump administration's final argument for the war: regime change in Iran.
Go for an all-out war.
Donald Trump might claim that he is helping liberate the Iranian people, but the situation resembles what happened in Venezuela with the capture of Nicolas Maduro. After removing a leader, there appears to be no clear plan to support opposition forces or to establish a stable new political system.
We are finished. Take over your government. It will be yours to take.
You only need to look at Israel's struggle to remove Hamas from Gaza after years of devastating conflict and tens of thousands of civilian deaths to understand how unlikely it is that a campaign of airstrikes alone can remove a regime.
The Iranian system is set up to withstand. It's anticipated this day. Continuity is built into its structure.
So, if what the Trump administration says publicly does not fully hold up, what could be the real reasons Donald Trump wants this war? For years, Donald Trump promoted an isolationist agenda, often opposing United States involvement in foreign.
This is where the expectation of the Trump administration fell short. They really had hoped that the killing of the supreme leader would be the trigger for the implosion of the regime as a whole.
He even singled out Iran specifically back in 2011 during the presidency of Barack Obama.
Stop the chaos in the Middle East. You're not going to have a war with me, and you're not going to have a third world war with me. That I can tell you.
However, the latest strikes show that since Donald Trump returned to power, he has launched attacks against 7 different nations. In just 12 months, he authorized more individual airstrikes than President Joe Biden approved during his entire time in office. This highlights a key reality about Donald Trump. What he says publicly does not always match how he acts. He has never truly been a strict isolationist, and it appears he learned several lessons from his first term as United States president. Back then, he was surrounded by advisors who often tried to restrain his instincts on policy decisions. But when he was allowed to follow those instincts, especially in foreign policy, he believed it worked in his favor. In 2020, after years of planning, the United States saw an opportunity to eliminate a top Iranian military leader, Qasem Soleimani. Donald Trump was warned that assassinating him could lead to escalating tensions or even a major regional conflict. Despite that advice, and without informing United States Congress, Trump ordered the killing of Soleimani in a drone strike on Iraqi soil in Iraq.
Our president will start a war with Iran.
Donald Trump appeared to conclude that using American military power in one large and dramatic operation could produce a decisive impact. In other words, it was foreign policy carried out almost like a form of reality television. Consider how United States Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth described this war.
Decided that everyone told him, you cannot do it. He has been proven right, they have been proven wrong.
Then look at a controversial video posted by the White House. It reportedly shows real footage from the war, where civilians are being killed, edited alongside imagery from the video game Call of Duty. It is also worth noting that during the last United States election campaign, Donald Trump's team was deeply concerned about alleged Iranian assassination plots. These threats reportedly targeted his Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and shortly after the election, the United States government brought charges against a man linked to a suspected Iranian plot to assassinate Donald Trump himself. Later, Trump told ABC News that the elimination of Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah.
We are punching them while they're down. Death and destruction. We are just getting started.
The Gulf states have long welcomed businesses and tourists from around the world. Countries such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar have been viewed as relatively safe havens from regional violence, while also hosting several United States military bases. But now an important question is emerging. Will these nations begin to reconsider their alliance with Washington, D.C., United States?
He told me, I got him before he got me. They tried twice. Well, I got him first.
Donald Trump may have felt confident when he decided to roll the dice and order the elimination of the Iranian Ayatollah, but this decision represents the greatest risk of his presidency.
This war is waged purely because Israel wanted it to be waged.
No one should have to die for a foreign country.
It is difficult to fully understand the military planning, discussions, and strategic reviews that took place within the circle of Donald Trump and his advisors in Washington, D.C., United States. The idea that they could not have anticipated such a response from Iran is almost inconceivable. However, both the United States and Iran appear to have been guilty of misunderstanding, underestimating, and miscalculating each other's reactions.
And seeing what he could do differently, feeling that perhaps the domestic side for him was not going as swimmingly as he had hoped. Venezuela was fast, and Iran could be the sort of tiara or crown on his legacy.
It is still unclear what the final objective is for Iran, let alone the wider Middle East. Does the United States want to establish democracy and create an entirely new government in Iran? Or would it accept a reformed Islamic Republic of Iran remaining in power under less hardline leadership? Either way, what does that mean for the Iranian people, whom Donald Trump has urged to reclaim control of their country? There were some celebrations following the death of the Iranian Ayatollah, but the reality is more complex. The current regime has embedded itself deeply into every aspect of life in Iran and has managed to maintain power for nearly 50 years. Protests earlier this year in Iran were brutally suppressed in January, with reports suggesting tens of thousands of Iranians were killed. Meanwhile, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, remains a wealthy and heavily armed organization that continues to support the government in Tehran, Iran.
Two great wartime leaders working together to bring down evil.
This is why some experts believe that Israel, rather than Donald Trump or even the Iranian people, may ultimately achieve the outcomes it desires from this war.
I have to tell you, George, as I spoke to the president, he sounded to me like a president who feels invincible.
Everything Trump is trying to do is to make sure that it's the biggest, outdoing previous presidents. He wants to become the standard for Republican foreign policy, taking that mantle away from, that title away from Ronald Reagan.
In conflicts like this, the people without weapons often have the most to lose and the least influence over their future. To discuss the future of Iran and the wider Middle East, the discussion now turns to Kim Gattas, a journalist and author who joins the conversation from Beirut, Lebanon. Kim Gattas, as someone who has studied this region for many years, what has surprised or shocked you the most about what has happened so far?
Well, most of the people we had in mind are dead. Pretty soon we're not going to know anybody.
Many observers argue that the way Iran is currently retaliating suggests that the country is reacting chaotically. But you believe there is actually a clear strategy behind Iran's response.
This is not a so-called regime change war.
The Trump administration has presented several different justifications for starting this war with Iran. In your view, has Donald Trump and his administration truly considered the long-term consequences the day after the conflict?
The region is absolutely more dangerous. The region is an all-out war in ways that we haven't seen in decades. The future relations of countries within the region after this war are impossible to foresee.
You are currently in Beirut, Lebanon, where the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, are advancing. Do you see the war expanding not only in Lebanon, but potentially across other parts of the Middle East as well?
Is to fight back, make this war as costly as possible, so that after they agree to a ceasefire, everyone believes that it was a mistake to start it.
Some analysts claim that Israel actually prefers chaos or even civil war within Iran, weakening it so that it can no longer act as a regional rival. At the same time, the United States may want something very different, a democratic and stable Iran.
All of the GCC states are infuriated, seeing that they gave the United States the right to have bases on their territory in order to protect them, but instead, the presence of these bases have actually become the source of their...
Finally, when discussing the consequences of this war, one crucial perspective is often overlooked: what the Iranian people themselves actually want for the future of Iran.
It's very hard to understand the military planning and discussions and strategic reviews that would have gone on inside the Trump universe. That they could not have anticipated that Iran would react in this way is inconceivable, but both sides have actually been terribly guilty of misunderstanding and underestimating and miscalculating the other. Israel has a very specific need for Iran to be fragmented and weak. A strong, sovereign, intact Iran, democratically ruled or even stably ruled, no longer isolated economically, is really a nightmare scenario for Israel.
As who would have thought that for Tehran? And I always thought, they're not suicidal. They will fight to the death, but they're not suicidal. But it turns out that this has become a moment, because of the killing of Ali Khamenei, that this is a fight to the death for them and a fight for survival. They actually do understand geopolitics. We may not agree with them. They have their worldview, their prism, the way they see things, their calculations, their rationale. But they are, I would say, actually masters of geopolitics, even though they've had many, many setbacks. What they're trying to do by targeting Gulf countries, including civilian targets like hotels and so on, but also the airport of Dubai, for example, to try to turn this into a wider conflict and push Gulf countries to press the Americans and the Israelis to wrap up the conflict, because countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE cannot sustain this kind of war situation for a very long time. And that's a real dilemma for Gulf countries. So they don't want this to drag. On the other hand, they don't want this to end quickly, inconclusively, with a vengeful regime still in place that could continue to make their lives difficult in the region. So it's really a catch-22. It doesn't sound like it, and that is what is the most concerning about this. Aside from the fact that it was not a preemptive strike, there was no imminent threat, it is done without congressional approval, without UN support, without an international coalition. Setting aside all of that, the laundry list of reasons why President Trump thought he should go to war is already problematic, because it means you don't have a defined goal. You don't know how you're going to define success. Is it when you've destroyed all the ballistic missiles? Is it when you've killed Ali Khamenei? Clearly not. Is it when you found the stockpile of uranium? Is it when you've installed a new president of Iran, whoever that may be? And when it comes to new leadership in Iran, I find it incredibly callous of President Trump to say, well, we had two, three people in mind in terms of the next leadership, and, they were great options. Oh, but actually they were killed in a strike. What kind of planning is that? And I find that the most concerning. And the reason why that is concerning, especially, is for the Iranian people, who are now stuck between America and Israel, who are waging war without a defined goal, without a definition for success, without a plan for the day after, and a regime stuck between that and a regime that is only going to become more oppressive, more repressive, rounding up dissidents or anyone who criticizes, sending out the police to round up people, and potentially also, if there is a breakdown of the state, they'll find themselves in, a situation of chaos and potentially civil war. I think we're in slightly uncharted territory. And of course, we have to see what else the United States and Israel are planning in terms of strikes against Iran, whether this does wrap up in the next few days or week under pressure from Arab allies or whether it continues, and what are exactly Israel's plans, or what does success look like for Israel. And I think that looks very different from what President Trump has in mind. You know, I find it really rather ironic that, in a very sad way, that Iranian officials used to boast that they controlled 4 Arab capitals, Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad and Sana'a. And now we have an Israeli prime minister boasting that he's fighting on 7 battlefronts. And we heard from him just 2 days ago after this started, saying that he's been waiting, that this has been his dream for 40 years. He didn't quite define the dream, the contours of that dream. But I think that, you know, if we've been living with the dynamics of the era of the Iranian Revolution, launched since 1979, with the regional architecture that Iran put in place since then, we are now very much entering the Middle East of Bibi Netanyahu. Very possibly, although I take some issue with the word democratic, because I think it's an illusion to think that we could go from where we are today in Iran to a democratic Iran, unfortunately. Not because democracy is not within the realm of possibilities for the Iranian people, but because I don't think that's where we're heading. Does Israel want chaos, a collapse of the state? I find it really hard to accept that anybody would want that, because that is just not in the long-term interest of any country in the region, including Israel. Why would you want chaos all around you and war forever? I think the Israeli people deserve better than that, and they deserve what, had been discussed with countries like Saudi Arabia, which is to establish ties with a country like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which would bring along 2 billion Muslims as custodians of the 2 holy sites, in exchange for a credible path towards a Palestinian state. I think that has a lot more promise for a secure, stable and peaceful Israel at peace with its region, with its neighbors in the region, rather than constant war, which is exhausting for the people, exhausting for the army and exhausting for the economy of Israel. Now we're seeing more Iranians than ever wishing for outside intervention, because they've tried to remove this system, this Islamic Republic regime, for decades, with repeated uprisings that have been painful and costly for Iranian civilians and very brave protesters. So they've been wishing now for the overthrow of their system with outside help. And we saw people in Tehran in videos that were published online that were celebrating the death of Ali Khamenei. But I think history teaches us that, regime change from outside without a day after plan, as America seems to, keep repeating this mistake, is not going to lead to good results for the Iranian people. And I fear that not only are they going to live through war, but at the end of it, they're not going to get what their hearts desire, which is a more just and fair and representative government. And President Trump doesn't care, and neither does Netanyahu.
Kim Gattas, thank you very much for talking to me. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.